Right now, as we've been watching, Donald Trump is in a courtroom, and in about an hour, President Biden will head back on the campaign trail. He's going to Delaware for an event. And as striking as that contrast might seem, not everyone is seeing that contrast. New polling from NBC News demonstrates where you get your news significantly impacts what you think of this election cycle. Among voters who read newspapers and watch national network news, Biden is winning, while among those who don't consume either and don't follow politics, Trump is the pick. Joining me now, NBC News White House correspondent Monica Alba, and back with us from outside the courthouse is Vaughn Hilliard. I guess part of the issue here in this campaign is which group has more people? Are there more people watching TV news and consuming newspapers, or are there more people who aren't paying attention? Monica, I want to ask you about President Biden and how he's out there campaigning and what the White House and what the campaign feels about the consumption out there and how they address it.
Yeah, it's so interesting when you do look at this data from our NBC News poll that you just put up there, Katie, because when you do look at the traditional consumption, people who still read newspapers in print, people who watch the evening news shows, people who are watching cable programs like this one right now, they heavily lean towards President Biden. And then those people who just really say they don't follow political news at all, and that's not any kind of a traditional news consumption diet that they have, they lean heavily towards former President Trump. And so you see that kind of campaign strategy playing out in real time for the Biden campaign and the re-election effort, because they know that those voters, they already have a sense of how to get to them through that traditional media strategy that we've seen for decades and we've seen campaigns of both parties pursue. But it's really about getting to some of those voters that don't live in those more typical places. And that is why you see them have a more online and digital strategy when it comes to that. But the larger approach to this trial overall for weeks has been not to say anything too specific about it, but in the last couple of days or so, we really have seen the president himself lean in a bit more heavily. He certainly was joking about his Republican opponent at the White House Correspondents' Dinner over the weekend, even talking about and referring to, quote, stormy weather, saying that he's been tied up in the last couple of weeks with something else, even acknowledging those reports of the former president falling asleep in court at times as, quote, Sleepy Don, which is a nickname that we know is sort of a play on what Donald Trump has for years called Joe Biden in terms of Sleepy Joe. So trying to kind of capitalize on some of that using humor, but that is the extent of what they're going to be talking about when it comes to this trial. Instead, they want to do counter programming and have the president be out doing these events, having these official White House events where he's talking about legislation, but also campaign events where he really is calling out his rival here and talking about the specific things he's outlining for a second term, as was illuminated in that Time article today. So expect the campaign to continue to do a lot of that while creating content in a digital manner that is, they hope, reaching people that right now maybe aren't paying as close of attention to what is happening in this consequential trial.
Monica, Vaughn's shot froze on us, unfortunately. I'm going to ask you this question. The White House and the president, do they see that the Donald Trump hush money trial is a benefit to them? Do they like seeing Donald, not like, but do they think that campaigning, it's a good thing to have Donald Trump in a courtroom, or are they worried that maybe it could backfire, politically speaking?
Right. They want to be incredibly careful about what they say about these legal matters, of which we know there are many. This is just one trial that's ongoing now, where they don't want to have ever any kind of an appearance of any interference, which is, of course, what Donald Trump, when he's sometimes talking to the courtroom cameras, he likes to imply that this is somehow being rigged without presenting any evidence. And we know that that is not accurate. So the White House doesn't see much political upside to engaging in that kind of a back and forth. And I think you'll continue to see them instead try to say, yes, we do have the ability to campaign and send the president on the road while Donald Trump is tied up in this court proceeding.
The court proceeding is proceeding. There's a few updates from inside the courthouse about Davidson confirming a relationship and knowledge of Dylan Howard, talked a little bit more about how he met Michael Cohen, and a little color from inside the courtroom from our own reporter that Trump is primarily, it doesn't appear to be awake. That's what it looks like here. Monica Alba. Monica, thank you